You're at your brother's dream wedding in Napa Valley. Everything looks perfect: the venue, the bride, the fairy tale romance. But then your husband leans over and whispers four words that change everything. She's not who you think she is. What would you do? Well, let me tell you what happened to me, and trust me, you're not going to believe this story. I'm Sarah, I'm 32, and I've been happily married to David for 5 years. My younger brother Jake has always been my best friend, so when he announced his engagement to his girlfriend Emma and invited us to their destination wedding in Napa Valley, we were over the moon. This was going to be the wedding of the century. But here's the thing about perfect stories: sometimes they're too perfect to be true. Let me take you back to the beginning. Jake met Emma at a charity event in San Francisco just 10 months before the wedding. 10 months. I know, it sounds crazy fast, but hey, when you know, right? That's what we all thought. Their romance was like something out of a movie: whirlwind dates, romantic getaways, and then boom, engagement after just 5 months. Emma seemed incredible. She was gorgeous, intelligent, had just finished her MBA, and came from money. I mean, her family was loaded. Her dad apparently owned half the real estate in Seattle. She was everything you'd want in a sister in law: charming, sophisticated, and she made Jake happier than I'd ever seen him. The wedding venue was absolutely breathtaking. We're talking about a private estate with rolling vineyards, perfectly manicured gardens, and mountain views that looked like they belonged on a postcard. Emma's parents were footing most of the bill, which explained why no expense was spared. From the moment we arrived, Emma was everywhere. Not in an annoying way, but in that perfect hostess way that made everyone feel special. She remembered everyone's names, asked about their jobs, their families, their interests. She was particularly attentive to my dad, asking detailed questions about his investment firm and seeming genuinely fascinated by his business strategies. She's quite the charmer, David whispered to me during the welcome dinner as we watched Emma laugh at something my dad said. She makes Jake happy, I replied. That's all that matters. But here's where things started getting weird. The next day, I accidentally walked in on Emma having a phone conversation. Her voice was completely different, harder, more businesslike. She was saying something about handling a situation and how they'd come too far to mess this up now. When she saw me, she instantly switched back to her sweet, melodic voice, claiming it was just wedding planner drama. Then I noticed something odd. Emma had multiple phones. Not just one or two, but I saw her using phones with different colored cases throughout the day. Blue one in the morning, red one in the afternoon. When I mentioned it to David, he found it strange too, but we both rationalized it. Maybe one was for business, one personal, one for wedding stuff. Rich people do weird things, right? The weirdness continued. At the bridal fitting, when someone mentioned Emma's Stanford MBA, her cousin looked confused and said she thought Emma went to UCLA. Emma quickly changed the subject, but I caught that moment of panic in her eyes. David started noticing inconsistencies too. At the bachelor party, Jake was telling stories about how he and Emma met, but they didn't match what Emma had told other people. Jake said they met at a charity auction where he outbid her for a vacation package. But Emma's friends had heard a completely different story about spilling coffee on him at a cafe. Small things, the kind of things that make you pause but not enough to ruin a wedding over. The wedding day itself was absolutely perfect. Emma looked stunning walking down the aisle. Jake was practically glowing with happiness, and their vows were so touching that half the guests were in tears. Even I started feeling guilty for having any doubts. This woman clearly loved my brother, but at the reception, David started taking photos. Not just normal wedding photos, but deliberate shots of Emma with different groups of people. When I asked him about it, he just said he was capturing memories, but there was something in his voice that made me nervous. Then I noticed something else. Emma seemed to have very few actual family members at the wedding. There was her cousin, an aunt and uncle, and her parents. But where were all her childhood friends? Her college roommates? Her work colleagues? Most of the guests were either her parents' friends or people from Jake's side. The night of the wedding, my dad was deep in conversation with Emma's father about some investment opportunity. I could see my dad getting more and more excited as they talked. Emma's dad was talking about connections in Asian markets and ways around regulatory hurdles. My dad, who'd made his fortune in green energy investments, was eating it up. That's when the pieces started clicking into place for David. The morning after the wedding, we were at the post wedding brunch. David had been quiet all morning, constantly checking his phone and stepping away for calls. I could tell something was bothering him, but every time I asked, he gave vague answers about checking in with the hospital. Then, right in the middle of brunch, he leaned over and whispered those four words that changed everything. "We need to leave now." I was confused. We couldn't just leave in the middle of a family brunch. That's when David looked me straight in the eye and said, "The bride. She's not who she says she is, not even close." My blood went cold. David explained that his instincts had been screaming that something was wrong from day one. All those little inconsistencies, the way she manipulated conversations, the multiple phones, it reminded him of a patient he'd had who was running an elaborate scam. So David did what any good husband would do. He called in a favor from a friend who works in private security and ran a background check on Emma. What came back was absolutely terrifying. Emma Wilson didn't exist. The woman my brother had just married was actually someone named Alexandra Petrov, and she was a professional con artist who specialized in marriage fraud. She had at least three confirmed identities that she'd used over the past 5 years, and each time, the pattern was the same: marry into money, integrate into the family's financial life, then disappear with everything she could take. David showed me the evidence on his phone: driver's licenses with Emma's photo but different names, marriage certificates showing she'd been married to other wealthy men, news articles about investment scams and missing funds, police reports, FBI warnings. The most chilling part? Jake was never the target. My dad was. Emma had specifically targeted Jake as a way to get close to our father and his investment firm, which managed over $300 million in assets. We had to think fast. David's security contact had discovered that someone had installed sophisticated spyware on my dad's computer during the wedding. They already had access to his passwords, account numbers, and communications with financial institutions. The plan was probably to disappear with millions right after the honeymoon. We couldn't wait. We drove back to the estate that night and gathered the family. Jake's reaction was heartbreaking. The disbelief, then the anger, then the crushing realization that everything he thought he knew about his wife was a lie. When we confronted Emma, she tried to maintain her innocent act at first. But when she realized we had concrete evidence, something incredible happened. It was like watching a mask fall off. Her entire demeanor changed: her voice, her posture, her accent. The sweet, charming woman we'd known for months just vanished. "Well," she said in a completely different voice, cold and calculating, "this is certainly unexpected." She didn't even deny it. She talked about her business like it was a legitimate career. She rationalized it as wealth redistribution, helping to spread money around from people who had more than they needed. The scariest part was how casual she was about it, like destroying lives was just another day at the office. But here's where the story gets really wild. While we were confronting her, my dad had been working behind the scenes. He'd contacted the FBI, frozen all his accounts, and had security monitoring the estate. Emma, or Alexandra, or whatever her real name was trapped. Her accomplices, the people who'd posed as her family at the wedding, had already disappeared. They were professional actors who worked with various con artist crews around the country. The whole thing was an elaborate production, and we'd been the unwitting audience. The FBI told us later that Alexandra had been planning this con for over a year. She'd specifically researched our family, created fake social media accounts going back years, and even had a storage unit filled with detailed files on all of us. She knew our habits, our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities. We weren't just victims, we were marks who'd been studied and targeted. The aftermath was devastating for Jake. The marriage was annulled, of course, but you can't just erase the emotional damage. He'd fallen in love with someone who literally didn't exist. Every memory, every moment they'd shared was built on lies. But here's the thing that saved us: we stuck together as a family. We trusted each other enough to listen when something felt wrong. David's instincts, my observations, Jake's willingness to face the truth, and my dad's quick thinking all came together to prevent a disaster that could have destroyed us financially and emotionally. Alexandra was eventually sentenced to federal prison for fraud. She was connected to at least 5 other similar scams across the country. Some of her accomplices were caught, though the man who'd posed as her father, apparently the ringleader of the operation, is still out there somewhere. Jake slowly healed. It took time, therapy, and a lot of family support, but he eventually started dating again. He's more cautious now, but he hasn't let the experience destroy his capacity for love. He's learned to trust his instincts and to take relationships slow. Our family came out stronger in the end. We learned to trust our gut feelings when something doesn't feel right. We learned that real love doesn't try to isolate you from your support system, it strengthens those connections. And we learned that sometimes the people who seem too good to be true really are. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had that gut feeling about someone? That little voice in your head saying something isn't right, even when everything looks perfect on the surface? Don't ignore it. Trust your instincts. Real relationships can withstand scrutiny. Fake ones crumble under examination. If this story taught you anything, or if it reminded you to trust your instincts about someone in your life, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever encountered someone who seemed perfect but something felt off? Share your story. You might help someone else avoid a similar situation. And if you want to hear more stories about trusting your instincts and protecting yourself and your loved ones, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because awareness is the first step in protecting ourselves from people who prey on trust and love. Remember, genuine relationships are built on truth, not perfect facades. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.